Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel Code with Hafiz. My name is Hafizullah Masoudi and this is our 7th video of this tutorial, which is creating the multiple authentication system in Laravel framework. As you remember guys, in our last video we finished everything about permissions, and the only thing that is left for the multiple authentication system is the roles management. So I already have opened the project in the browser, so let's log in as administrator. So click on the login link and the password is password, and as you can see we have created manage users and we also have created manage permissions. Now we want to create manage roles, so open your code in text editor, and in here we have to go to resources, views, layouts, because we want to create the link for the index page of roles. So if I scroll down, guys, we don't need to work on the app blade. We have to open our sidebar, which is inside this admin, manage or not manage roles, layouts, and open this admin blade, and let's copy this route from here and paste it in this link href. And instead of permission index, let's say role index, and for the text let's say manage roles, and for the icon let's say it should be also same as the permissions, let's say far bars. So now let's create this role index route in our route file, which is inside routes folder web.php, and at the bottom let's say route colon get, and the URL should be manage/role/index, and this one should go to admin controller at role index method, and let's also give this route a name of role index. Now let's open our admin controller and create this role index method. So let's go to app http controllers and role controller, or not role controller guys, admin controller. And if I scroll down in here, let's say public function role index, and inside here what I want to do is grab all the roles from the database first of all and store it in a variable called roles. Roles should equal to role model colon all, and let's also check at the top if we are using the role model. So yeah, we are using the role model, and that's good. Now after grabbing everything from the database, now I want to return my view. So return view, and the view should be inside, let's copy this one from here, so paste it instead of this one, and instead of this edit let's say index, and permission not role, and this one should be roles. So guys, let's create now this index blade. So scroll down, and this is our role folder. We already have created it. Now right click, new file, index.blade.php. Now inside here what I want to do is copy everything from the permission index. So open this one and Ctrl A, Ctrl C, and paste it here, Ctrl V. Now let's customize it from the top. So instead of permission, let's say roles, and leave the permission create route for now because we don't want to have any errors. And for the text, let's say create new role, And let's also open our phpMyAdmin. So localhost phpMyAdmin, go, and let's go to this multi-auth and roles table. As you can see, we have name, display name and description, same as the permissions, so we don't have to change all of these, but instead we need to change this permissions to roles and this one to role, and copy this role and paste it instead of each permission. So paste it here too, or let's leave it like it is, but let's remove these routes because we don't need it. And in here let's say roles for the pagination links. Let's also remove this create route also. And now if we go back to the browser and refresh, and let's click on this manage roles, it says method illuminate liquid links does not exist, and that is because if we go back to our code and admin controller, you can see we are saying role colon all, but because we are using pagination, so instead of this, let's say order by ID, and we want to order it descending, and let's say arrow paginate, and we want to limit the pagination to 10. So if I now refresh, you can see now we have access to each role, and we have 4 roles in the table of roles already created. Now the next step is to work on this create new role. So, and one thing more guys, if you see this icon is not working, so let's fix that also. Let's go back to the admin blade, and that is not working because we have to remove this extra R. So now if I go back and refresh, yeah, that's working fine. So now let's create a route for this link. So get back to our code editor and index blade, and in here let's say double curly brackets, and inside our brackets let's say route role create. Let's create this route inside our route file, which is web.php. Let's duplicate this one and paste it instead. And for the URL, let's say create, and the method should be get. So let's go to admin controller and create this method. Let's copy this one and paste it again, but instead of role index, let's say role create, and this time we want to grab all the permissions because we want to attach permissions to each role, so we need access to the permissions. So our variable should be permissions, and instead of role model, let's say permission model, and we don't want to order by. Let's remove the pagination also, and we need to say all. Now instead of index, let's say create, and instead of roles, let's say permissions. Now let's create this create blade inside role folder. So right click, new file, create.blade.php. Now in here guys, what I want to do is copy everything from the create blade of permission because we are doing the same process. So copy this one and paste it in here. Now first let's remove these scripts because we don't need it, so remove them. And after that, what I want to do is let's also remove this row. Remove these 3 inputs, or not remove them, leave them, but remove this one also, and we need the button, so leave it. Now let's customize everything from the top. So instead of permission, let's say role, and in here instead of permission store, or leave it for now. Let's remove this vf because we don't need it, and the other things are, I think, good. Yeah, change the text for the button also. So let's say row. Now if we go back to our browser and refresh, and let's click on this create new role, you can see this is the form that we want. But guys, let's customize it a little bit more because we want to echo our permissions also. So let's get back to our code, and in here what I want to do is after this row, let's create another row, or before creating a row, let's create another card inside our card. So div with the class of card, and we need our card body, and inside this card body let's first say hdo, and let's say permissions, and after this hdo let's say call dash md dash, or we don't want our call md, let's remove it. Let's create a form check. So div with the class of form dash check, and inside here what I want to do is create my for each loop. So for each loop, and I want to for each for the permissions as permission, and inside here what I want to do is create my input. So input type should be checkbox, and class should be form dash check dash input, and let's also give it a name of permissions selected. And the other thing, let's also give the value double curly brackets, and our permission variable arrow id, and after that, and guys, one thing more, let's also put this input inside a label. So first let's create a label and remove this for. Let's give the class of form dash check dash label, and inside our label we want our input field. Now after the end of the input, let's also echo our permission display name. So let's put it inside em tag. So let's also have some parentheses, and let's say double curly brackets $ permission arrow display name. So now if I go back to the browser and refresh, you can see it is showing everything, but it is kind of broken. So let's see what is wrong. So if I go back to the code, and in here let's check everything. Form check label, form check input. I think everything is fine. Let's put this label inside a call dash md dash 3. Now if I refresh, well, it is not showing good. So let's also create a row inside this form check, but outside the for each loop. So let's put the for each loop inside this row. And now if I refresh, you can see it is looking good now. So guys, we have access now to all our permissions. Now we want to declare a route for the form submission and store all the data to the database. But before that, guys, let's bind these permissions to a view object and save the selected permissions in one hidden input, because we want to send multiple selected permissions as an array and save each of them in the database. So what I want to do is let's create a hidden input in here. So input type should be hidden, and let's give it a name of permissions, and let's bind its value to this form check or this checkbox. So in here, let's say permissions selected. Now let's also give this checkbox a v-model. So v-model, and we want this permission selected object. And the next thing is we want to declare this permission selected as an array. So in our script part, let's say open our script tags, and inside here what I want to do is create a view instance. So var app equals to new view, and inside here let's say l app comma and our data field, and inside data field let's say permissions selected should be array. So I think, guys, that's all for the create blade. And now let's create the role store route. So for the action of this form, let's say role store, and method should be post. Now let's create this route inside our route file. So duplicate this one and paste it instead. For the URL, let's also say role store, and the method should be post. Now let's create this method, this role store method, inside our admin controller. So let's say public function role store, and we want our request variable, so request. Now the first thing I want to do is validate the data. So $ this arrow validate, and I want to validate the request that is coming from the form, and declare our array, and inside this array let's copy this everything from our permission create, because we are doing the same process. So let's copy everything from here and paste it in here. Now for the validation, everything looks just fine, but instead of permission we want our role model, and this variable should be also role. So copy this one, paste it in instead of each permission, and after that finally we are saving everything to the database. And after that what we need to do is save the permissions relationship with the roles also in the pivot table of roles and permission. If I go back to the PHPMyAdmin, you can see we have a table called permission role, and it is a pivot table. We only store the IDs of role and permission in this table and declare their relationship. So let's get back to our code, and in here what I want to do is let's say if $request arrow permissions. If we have any permissions selected, then we want to sync all the permissions to the table. So $role arrow sync permissions, and we want to explode because this permissions is coming as an array, so we have to explode it. So we want to explode according to comma. After that we want to explode the request arrow permissions field. And that's all for the permissions. After that, finally we are returning our redirect, which should be role index. I think our store method is finished and we are good to go and check the code if it works. So let's get back to our browser and refresh this page, and now let's create a new role. Let's say new role. Slug should be new dash role and description should be some text. Let's select this create user, read users, update users, delete users, and let's say create role. You can see new role has been created, and if we go back to the database and check the roles, the ID is 5, new role. And now if we go to this permission role and check for the role ID, you can see this is 5, 1 permission, 5 2 permission, 5 3 permission, and 5 4 permission, and there is nothing more. So guys, our create functionality has been done. Now the next part is to create the show blade for each role, which is this info icon. So let's get back to our code editor or text editor and go to this index blade and scroll down. Let's copy this route from here. So copy this one and paste it instead of this one. And instead of role create, let's say role show. And we also want to pass the ID. So comma $, role arrow ID. Now let's create this role show route inside our web.php. So duplicate this one and paste it instead. And instead of the store URL, let's say show slash, we also need the ID. Now let's create this role show method inside admin controller. So public function role show, and we have ID coming from the URL, so $ID. Now first let's grab all the role or not role permissions from the database, because we also want to show the selected permissions. So permission, or guys, we will grab the permissions from the role variable because of their relationship, so we don't need to grab the permission. Instead we need our role variable. So role model : find or fill the ID, and after that let's say arrow first, or we don't need first, that's all. Let's say return our view, and it should be inside admin.manage.role.show, and let's also compact our role variable. This one should be inside quotation, single quotation, and terminate it. Now let's create the show blade in our role folder. So right click, new file, show.blade.php. Now in here what I want to do is copy everything from the show blade of permission and paste it inside show blade of role. So instead of permission details, I want to say role details, and this route, let's remove this route or link because we don't need it, and in here let's say role, and for this one also let's say role. This one should be also role. Now if we go back to the browser and refresh and go to this info link, it says get method is not supported, and that is because this method should be get. Now if I refresh, yeah, you can see now it shows the information about our roles. Now let's also echo all the permissions attached to this role. So for that, what I can do is, first guys, one thing I want to do is let's remove this closing tags from each one of them, and and this one also. Let's also remove these two from here, and let's say this one should be called md6, and let's create another call dash md dash 6. And if we go back, refresh, let's remove the text center from this column D or this row. So now if I refresh, yeah, I think that's good. Now the next part is echo all the permissions for this role. So how can we do that, guys? We can do that. Let's create a card. So in here, let's create a card body, and inside this card body, let's create an h2 which says permissions. And after this h2, let's create a ul, and let's create our for each. So for each, we have only role variable, so arrow permissions as permission, and it will get all the permissions for this role. So let's create our li tag, and we want our double curly brackets, $ permission arrow display name. Now if we go back to the browser and refresh, it says undefined variable permission, and that is because we have to declare in here, let's say arrow with permissions. And now if we go back and refresh, it says property display name does not exist on the Eloquent Builder instance. So guys, instead of find or fail, let's say where, and we want where id equals to id, and after that let's say arrow first. And now if we go back and refresh, it says undefined variable permission. And if we go back to our code, let's see what is the problem. So yeah, we have an extra s in here. So if I now refresh, yeah, that's good. I think guys, our previous code should also work. So let's see if it works. So if now, yeah, that works just fine. We only had error in this permission variable. So this is guys the show blade for our role. Now the next part is to create the edit blade and update each role and save the changes to the database. So let's get back to our code and go to index blade. Now we want to copy this route from here and paste it in this edit link. We need our role ID, and for the route let's say role edit. Now let's create this route in our web.php. So duplicate this one and paste it instead. And for the URL, let's say edit/id. Now let's create this role edit in admin controller. So let's copy, or yeah, let's copy this one, this create method, and paste it in here. Now instead of role create, let's say role edit, and we have id coming from the URL. We need all the permissions, and we also need to grab the role from the database. So to do that, let's copy this one from here. Copy this one and paste it in here too. And let's also pass our role variable 2, and instead of create, let's say edit blade. Now let's create this blade inside role folder. So new file, edit.blade.php. Now let's copy everything from the create blade of role and paste it inside edit blade. And let's start from the top. So for the title, let's say edit role, and for the display name, let's declare a value, double curly brackets, and we have role variable arrow display underscore name. Let's copy this value field and paste it for the name also. Now we need our name and paste it for the description also. So this one should be description. Now for the permissions, what I can do is use the vue.js to select the attached permissions to this role, and we can do that in our view instance in the data field. So now let's remove this array from here and create a curly bracket and 4 exclamation marks, and between them let's say role arrow permissions arrow plug, and we want to plug each permission by the ID because we are connecting the permissions with the rules through ID, so we need our ID field in here. And I think guys that's all for the edit blade. So now let's check how it looks. So if I now click on this one, you can see everything is working just fine. Let's also change the text for this create rule. So instead of create rule, let's say save changes. Now let's create our rule update method, or not method, route, and we also want to pass the ID, so role arrow ID. Now let's create this route inside web.php. So duplicate this one and paste it instead. Paste in here too, and instead of edit, let's say update/id. Now let's create this role update in our admin controller. So what I can do is copy this public function role store and paste it again. Instead of role store, let's say role update. We have request coming from the form, and besides that we also have the ID coming from the URL. So for the validation, we only need to update the display name and the description. So first let's disable this one, this is slug, because we don't want to mess with the slug, because it will throw errors in the future if you delete any of them or change the name of the slug. So we don't want to edit slug, so let's say disabled. And now let's remove the validation for the slug also, and we don't want to save it to the database also. And instead of new role, let's say : find or fail the ID. And after saving everything to the database, we are syncing the permissions also, and after that we are redirecting to the role index. Or let's redirect to the role show, and we also want to concatenate or send our ID with this route. So comma $ID. Now let's check our code if it works. So if I refresh, now instead of this let's say updated, and for this one let's also say updated. Let's select 4 permissions more. So save changes, it says post method not supported, and that is because we have to change this method to post. Now let's refresh, continue. Yeah, you can see permissions are added and these 2 are also updated. So guys, I think we have finished everything for the management in the admin panel. Now the only thing that is left with these three management is the delete functionality. So guys, one thing I want to say about the delete functionality in this video is that we only will create the delete functionality for the users, because we don't want to have any errors in the future due to using the permissions and roles in our project. So if we delete any of them, it will break our project. So we don't want to mess with the permissions and roles. So we will only create the delete functionality for the users in our next video. So I think guys, this is enough for this video, and I hope you like the video. So if you like the video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, and don't also forget to subscribe to my channel for the support. So thanks for watching this video, and see you guys in the next video.